So we've assembled a grand group of minds to share insights on moving forward strategically through the COVID-19 pandemic, which is why our first presentation is aptly titled Moving Ahead with Intention and has a special focus on recruitment and retention. Please welcome our panel. Chris Harrow, Fire Chief in Minto, Ontario. Judy Unsworth, Deputy Fire Chief for Strathmore, Alberta. Michael Seth, Director of Emergency Services and Fire Chief for the Cape Breton Municipality and City of Sydney in Nova Scotia. And Tom DeSorcy, the Fire Chief in Hope, BC, who will serve as both panelist and moderator for this session. Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Laura. Good day and hello, panel. How are you today? I could say this morning, but in Michael's case, it's afternoon.
It's afternoon here.
And Tom, you're not used to being up this early, are you?
No kidding. I mean, this is a little rare for the guy in the white shirt. Come on now. This is unique. And hi, Judy. How are you in Alberta?
Good morning. I'm great, thanks. How are you?
Very well. And I wanted to start out before we get into conversation. Of course, we're going to talk about, as Laura said, fire service issues in terms of this time we are in, and for the R's that we always talk about, recruitment and retention, but maybe a little bit about your departments. And because while we talk about the fire service and we know the fire service, our fire service in our communities is different in so many ways, and I think we need to know where you are, where you're coming from, what your position is, and a little bit of bio from your community. And maybe I'll just go in sort of an Eastern cross Canada order. Let's start in Strathmore, Alberta. Hi again, Judy. Tell us what's going on in Strathmore and your position.
So I'm currently acting chief, and I have always been the Deputy Director of Emergency Management. But our chief is acting as the Director of Emergency Management. So 6 months after starting this position, I am in the acting position, which is fine. We're a community of just under 14,000 people. We have Canada's Main Street running right through our community. So Highway 1, which connects all of us, is splits Strathmore. We have 40 members, 6 full-time and 34 volunteers. When COVID started, we split our 6 into 2 shifts of 12 hours each. 3 on each shift with a paid on call filling the 4th seat. Typically we run mostly medicals and motor vehicle collisions. Fire, we have capability for water rescue, high angle rescue, and hazmat. We do about 400 calls a year.
Wow. Chris Harrow is in Minto, Ontario. Tell us about Minto.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Minto is where nobody knows where we are. So we're halfway between the cities of Kitchener, Waterloo, that area, and Lake Huron. So we're right at the halfway point. So our Tim Hortons is very busy on lake traffic on weekends because everyone stops there for their Tim Hortons and all their downtown shops and all that stuff. But Minto Fire, we've actually just, I haven't even told Laura this, but we just signed an agreement as of June 1st of this year. We're now in a partnership with department next door, Wellington North Fire, and I am been named the Director of Fire Services for both departments. Wow. And we've started a partnership. Yeah, it's a partnership where just the management team is managing both departments, but both departments are staying separate, and 2 separate councils, all that stuff, but the joint management team that we're going to manage both departments. So with the 2 departments, we have about 122 firefighters in 5 stations now. So a little bit more of a challenge, and especially coming into the partnership right in the middle of COVID is added a few things, but great people in both departments, and really looking forward to working together. And we've hit the road running in June so far, so it's pretty cool.
Wow. To the guy that is the newest Maritimer, shall I say? Is that fair, Michael? Hi, Michael.
That's very fair. I come here for the lobster for sure. So I was lucky enough to come into Cape Breton in November and into a system that's completely new and different to me. It's the second largest municipality in Nova Scotia, and we have 35 departments, of which I'm the chief of Sydney, but I'm also the director that has some oversight for 34 volunteer departments, and being able to distribute the grants and funds and provide assistance and bring the entire organization into a common firefighter operating role.
Wow, wow, that's
So we have
spectacular.
about 750 volunteers and about 70 career firefighters.
That's a challenge. Now you came from Ontario, right?
I did, yes.
So previous to that, what's the comparison?
It's a lot bigger here.
I can see that. I think, and from my world, and many may know what our community is like, but Hope is in British Columbia, about 2 hours east of Vancouver. We are famous for a lot of things. We share the Trans-Canada Highway. It comes through here on the way to Strathmore, plus 4 other highways that converge in our community. So without traveling to the US, it's very difficult to travel, if not impossible, from across Canada without going through Hope by road. We are famous for the television show Highway Through Hell, so that adds to our excitement in this area, being I guess this isn't like season 9 of the Discovery program. So anyway, so we run 3 fire halls that in fact are one department. We used to be 3 fire departments 20 years ago, and my position as a firefighter 21 years ago came into a fire chief position to amalgamate those 3 departments, which are now one department, mind you, with still the same 3 fire halls. So kind of unique that we've got 3 fire halls within 2 and 3 kilometers of each other. It's you know, it's nice to have, you know, because people live and work in different parts of the community, and they're able to go to a hall and bring apparatus accordingly. So instead of the 15 members per hall or per department minimum that we had, we're now at about 28 members of our department. So 350 was our call volume. Last year we went up 60%, closer to 500 calls. We started doing medical calls, you see, so added a little bit to the mix. So I want to jump into the COVID thing. I mean, I think, when was it, April, that we started using the word unprecedented? Weird times. Are we done with unprecedented and ready to move on and just do things differently, or where are we at? Throw it at me, Judy.
I'm ready to move on, but I don't think we're done with unprecedented. I think for us here in Alberta, we've just entered into stage 2, which we've been in for about a week and a little bit. And, you know, we're going to wait for 2.5 weeks to see if there's a repercussion from that. And we're holding fast here. I'm starting fire practice for the first time with our volunteers next week. After July 1st will be our first time we're returning to training, and wrote strict guidelines and SOGs about how we're going to behave, you know, with masking and deconning, and that we have full-time here in the same station working 12 hours a day. It's critical to maintain our decon on everything, equipment, etc.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to see a second wave, and if tradition holds true, there's never been a pandemic where the second wave isn't stronger. So I think we're just going to hold fast, you know, and behave in the meantime like it's normal, but it's not.
We you know, the virus sort of went west to east, and you know, stage 3 started this week in British Columbia, and it didn't really change things too much, other than the fact that the public, the people are encouraged to travel and expand the bubble even farther, travel and travel within the province, within British Columbia, CBC. That's the promotion I think a lot of the provinces are doing. And as we move east, and maybe ask to Chris and say, you know, where are you at, I guess, is the stage that you guys are into for training and such, or how far ahead are you guys?
Yeah, we're not much further ahead. We started stage 2 just a couple weeks before what Judy was talking about. So the beginning of June, we started back into training, and I know a lot of departments in the area, talking to them, we've all kind of worked together to try and do it similar. It is definitely a different world. You know, your smaller groups, your platooning training, which the volunteers, you never did. It was one night, and that's traditionally their night, and they show up and everybody's happy. You know, that's the night they're away from their wives and kids and husbands, and you know, they come out and that's it. So it's changing. You know, we're now 4 nights a week because you have to split everyone up into platoons, and it's actually, you know, one of the big things to think about it is us as chiefs is listening to your firefighters and that. And the feedback I'm getting was totally surprising, and it was great. Is they are really enjoying the small groups. And I asked, well, you know, how come? And they said, well, they're getting a lot more hands-on. It's not a group of 20 of them standing around working on pumps, you know, where two people could be on it and the other one stand around and talk about last night's baseball game or hockey game. So they're doing that. And a lot of the younger ones said, you know what, I'm not scared to ask questions, because in a big group, I don't want to ask a question to feel silly. Now, when there's only 4 or 5 of us in a platoon training, I'm not scared to ask the questions that I've always been wondering. And that really hit home with me to think, you know what, we start the conversation that when things do go back to the new normal, we might incorporate some of this just to make sure that the hands-on skills are being done in smaller groups all the time, where they're the only ones here, because they are getting so much out of it. So that was interesting feedback we got.
That is, I like to think the fire service, we are used to decon and used to all this stuff, and this should be a natural transition. What's happening in Nova Scotia for you, Michael? I mean, where are you guys at in terms of getting back into business, as it were?
Well, we've actually started progressing into our training has been returned. We're starting to move back into some normalcy here. We've actually been 15 days as of today with no new cases and no active cases.
Oh.
So it's been good. Our premier has worked with the maritime provinces, and they're going to be opening up a maritime bubble as of next Friday. Right. So we're going to have the ability to travel amongst that without having any implications when we return back to our province. So we have more of a tourist opportunity, I guess, and more discussions. And after we're done with this, I'm going to be going on to watch a media scrum with the premier for some more information on what's going on.
So Michael, let me ask you, I mean, like Chris said, obviously there's an opportunity here to do things differently that we didn't expect and think about before. Would you have any of those experiences in Sydney, thinking of, wow, this could be a better way of doing things?
Well, yeah, there's been a few things. Strangely enough, as a chief, I was the one that moved our full-time staff into 24-hour shifts. And we've heard it all through the years that we weren't going to be doing that and it wasn't something recommended, but we found that having the 24-hour shifts eliminated a lot of interaction between the platoons. And as a part of that, we sort of carried that over into our day-to-day operations and started piggyback that with some of the volunteers of how they can platoon their shifts or platoon their groups so that they're not interacting as much. But luckily with the release of some of the restrictions, we're actually able to have larger groups and larger gatherings now. So it's working out quite well.
Were there any orders, and in particular in Alberta, were there any orders to stop training, to stop practices, to certain operations? Did that ever come out in the form of an order? It never did in British Columbia, but it was recommendations to do that. What about Alberta and Ontario? Judy?
For me, it just came down to social distancing and such stringent requirements for masking and at the time gloves. And, you know, we're running full-time calls, of course, to medical. So writing policy and procedures about Tyvek suits. And then we went from Tyvek suits to gowns and back to Tyvek suits. And so it's been all over the place. And it's really largely directed by AHS. And so there wasn't specific orders about training as much as there was about all the parameters around training. So it became very impossible. And then I needed to protect my people. A large number of our volunteers here are full-time in other departments. And so the chances of them cross-contaminating each other became really high. So we just sort of slowed everything down. We're doing very much like Chris is, where we're going to have them in smaller groups. And the feedback, although we haven't started yet, the feedback is good. They're excited to come back and we're excited to have them back. And I'm sure it'll work out really well. You give me hope, Chris. Thanks.
Well, it does turn a dark thing into something positive for sure. Like we're all looking for positives out of it, and that was definitely a positive. So, to answer your question, Tom, about there was no direct orders or anything that from the province about training, but it was just same as Judy said, to protect our people. One of our biggest fears, the same with everybody, I'm sure across the country, was the element of if you had somebody come in and they were contracted COVID and they, you know, as volunteers, the pagers go off. And then you get 14, 15 people show up, and all of a sudden you have 15 people in quarantine. You could wipe out a whole station in a heartbeat.
Yes.
And in the early days, it was 14 days. There was, when the testing wasn't there, it was
Yep.
14 days of. So that was our biggest fear, is we guarded against getting anybody together. You know, even we recommend, you know, please don't do community anything. Just stay away as much as you can, because we can't afford to have an entire station wiped out. And that was my biggest fear with the early stages, for sure.
Force protection is the biggest thing. You know, they asked me from the outset, local media, politicians were saying, you know, what about staffing? What about the fact that during the pandemic, how are you going to be affected? And I kind of turned that around and said, we've never had as much staff in the community from a volunteer perspective as a result available, because during the daytime, that for most people that would go to work out of town, out of the area, or, you know, that kind of thing, they were available to us. And I don't know, did you experience the same thing?
We absolutely did, and that was one of the hardest things, because everybody was. It's an unfortunate event whenever the pages go off, we know, but in the fire service, they were so excited when they got a call, because they got to actually talk to another human being that wasn't a family member. They're like, no, the call's over, I don't want to go home. It's like, no, you have to. We have to clear the hall. You cannot all congregate. They're like, oh, I like talking to other adults. I don't want to go home and talk to my spouse or partner. Like, I've had enough. So
we found
that was
out
the toughest part.
We found that out we did some of the, you know, the care salutes, you know, at 7 o'clock, we did a couple of those parades, and there was a balancing act to say, do you want to put people in vehicles? Because that was against policy of putting too many people together, and we want to be protected. We don't want to, again, you know, contaminate the force, so to speak. But again, when the gang got together, that was really good, getting together with all the emergency services in the hospital parking lot. It really did a lot for our morale. I don't know about you guys doing those kind of things during that time.
Well, we actually had provincial orders that we weren't allowed to participate in the parades.
Wow.
However, for our actual operations and training, we were considered as essential services, and we were exempt from some of the orders. However, that we are also the pillars of the community, and people will reflect upon how we react and act under these orders. So it was trying to create that balancing act of, let's continue to keep some normalcy here, but also maintain the orders so that everybody else is following by example.
I think we were lucky here in our community. You know, I mean, we normally do recruiting and do a proper boot camp and do a proper process of bringing a group of people, a class in at once, if you will, in spring, in February, doing the advertising into March. Coincidentally, we didn't have any candidates this time around, and I'm kind of glad we didn't. I don't know how I would have ran recruit class, or if we were in the middle of it during this pandemic. I mean, you talk about recruitment and retention of recruits. I don't think we would have been able to maintain that. Judy, would you agree with that, or did you guys have any challenges around that?
You know, it's funny you mentioned that. We start in the fall. Our program's a little different. So, and typically we haven't had to recruit, people apply. We do an interview process, and then we select the applicants after that. And we were contemplating not actually running a recruit class this year, but now that we're in stage 2 and inevitably in stage 3, we're going to run a recruit class. But our previous recruit class, which would have graduated, so it takes them a year to graduate, they're going to be behind. They just are. You know, we haven't been able to do any of that stuff with them. And we're hoping to take a smaller recruit class this year. We'll merge them together and we'll do their 1001 level 2. So in the first year, they do 1001 level 1, and then the second year they finish it, and we'll merge the two of them together. So, you know, it has been tenuous at best. And you know, these new recruits are anxious and eager to get going and have a little bit of training and haven't finished their 1001 level 1. So yeah, I feel the same.
I think in Strathmore, obviously, Chris, Strathmore, they're lined up at the door to come in, and much the same in Minto, I would expect.
Oh, definitely, yeah. We have them lined up and banging on the door. No, it has actually gotten better in our areas. We're getting more recruits out, and that's another topic for maybe later to talk about reasons why. But to your point, we were right in the middle of a recruitment or of recruit training. Our county gets together, and all our recruits get together, and we train them as a county group. So they rotate between the different fire departments in the county, and they each take different weekends and train them and work together. And they were right in the middle. They just got partway through their level 1 training, and We put it on hold, and they're just getting back now in June, where they're coming in smaller squads and all that. And yeah, it was definitely tough, and they said it's tough. And now throw in the element of it's summertime, and you're trying to get them through the summer, and they're trying to do schoolwork online and all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely added a whole new element to them. But I think talking to them, it's going to make them a little bit stronger, because they sure have a new appreciation for what they're getting into and what we do for the community. So it's hopefully going to keep them stronger. That's what we'll keep saying.
Human behavior is an interesting thing, and you see in the workplaces that a lot of the apprehension of people getting back in the swing of things rode on the shoulders of employees, and I wonder how that's going to affect our people. Was there for any of you any issues in terms of, you said when the pagers go off, they want to respond, but anyone experience the opposite to that at all?
We didn't have very much of that was reported up. We had a lot of what everybody's saying is they want to do something, and I put that back to in the fire service. When there's an emergency happening, we're usually front and center. This pandemic, we're sitting in the sidelines and trying to support as best we can, and that's where a lot of the personnel sort of felt they felt that they could do something, but they felt useless at the same time.
We had a few members just because they work for other fire services or other EMS services, that a few of the members were reticent to attend any calls at all, just because of exposure. So they're doing it 24 hours for someone else and then come home and do it here, and that doubles their exposure for their families. So it was with clear parameters around that we certainly supported them and their comfort level. But for the most part, you're exactly right, Michael. Everybody wanted to do something. We did birthday drive-bys here, and that made a big difference. We initially did it because the community asked us to, but what it did is gave us an opportunity to get together, and we actually benefited probably more than the community did. It was amazing to see little ones so appreciative, and parents, and what would happen as we were doing them is the block would start to come together. So they'd all come out to their own doorways, or in the wintertime in March to their own doorways, and in the spring to their driveways, not getting together with each other, but just to watch the whole thing. And it was very heartwarming.
So what strategies can we take out of this time then, in terms of beyond recruitment and keeping the newer members engaged, but our current members? I mean, did you see any priority swings in the people that normally come out and trying to, talking about the retention thing? It's going to be a bit harder, I think. Am I wrong, Chris?
No, I think you're right. But I think it's like, obviously the pandemic's unprecedented, as you said earlier, Tom. But I think the biggest thing is, as Chiefs, is we just need to stay out ahead of it and think about what matters to our volunteers. And that was key in the beginning, is the questions and being able to answer them is, what happens if I get quarantined for 14 days? Who's going to pay my wage? And having that answer for them and reassurance, this is what we'll do for you. This is how we'll help you out. This is what we'll help you apply for. These are the programs that are available. And the same thing, with firefighters that lost their jobs, it's just doing that because we were helping, as a municipality, we're helping businesses, but also getting out to them to say, you can apply for the CERB and you can do this, and this is what you can. So it's getting out and then giving them policies and making sure that they understood how to use the PPE and found comfortable. We handed it out and thought, okay, it's pretty good, but then a lot of them come back and say, well, I haven't really used it in 3 years. How do I actually do this? So it was putting together a YouTube video for them and stuff like that. So it was just getting out ahead of it and being able to answer their questions, to put their, to calm them and know that we had their backs type thing. And I think that was the key.
What kind of retention strategies for Judy and Michael in terms of, what can we take away from this? And again, I guess, help calm the fears, if any, of our existing members. Judy?
It's been constant communication. I phone them all, and we put out a newsletter, and just the ability to get together, doing the hospital runs, like Michael was saying, and assuring them that as we move forward, we've got their best interest at heart. And some of our initial practicing, the lesson plans that we've got, we're doing the same thing. We're having 3 days in a week instead of everybody together once, or just to get them familiar with everything again. And answer their questions. And like Chris said, stay ahead of the curve. So, you know, policies to support them based on what they've said and to assure them that they're safe.
You have to be a bigger motivator now, don't you, Michael?
Yeah, and it's very interesting because I'm so new here. It's having to find out those resources and find out who those advocates are in the entire municipality and being able to get that message out there. So it was important. We were, as a municipality, we're responsible for some of the core training that we offer to the individual volunteer departments, and then they provide us with their recruits. So in the middle of this, we had to cease our training from a out of province operator because they're not allowed to come into the province without doing 14 days of isolation. So it suspended all of that. Even though we're loosening some of the restrictions, we're still trying to figure out how we're going to maneuver around some of this.
I think the volunteer fire service has gone through a lot of changes, and Chris and we were talking earlier about the last 10 years, how we came into different and evolved into different services to provide. I don't think 10 years ago that pandemic was part of our service. And in our case, we didn't even think about going onto a medical call. Obviously, the fire service has taken on a new role, and I think has been fully involved in this process, in this project, this event. I mentioned it in the magazine that never have would I thought I'd be on the same fire call as every fire chief in Canada, which basically we are. And Chris, maybe talk about your thoughts on the last 10 years and how we've changed and where we're going because of this in the volunteer fire service.
Yeah, like it's definitely changed, and it's a great point that one of the big beliefs I have, and you know, with this new partnership that we just formed in Minto and Wellington North with the joint management team, is it's to cover off that paperwork aspect of the fire service. You know, one of the things I'm a firm believer in is, as a volunteer, you don't sign up to complete 2 hours of paperwork after every call. You don't sign up to write exposure reports and write big long incident reports and all that kind of stuff. That's the type of stuff as the fire management we have to really guard against. And you know, talking to the firefighters over the past 10 years, that's one of their biggest fears. Like, we come out and say, okay, we have to do decontamination, and we have to document that it's all decontaminated. We have to document your gear was washed. We have to document you washed your body, like, you know, whatever your policy may say. And they're like, I'm not filling out any more forms. Like, I'm formed to death. I just want to come when the pager goes off, complete the incident, do whatever hands-on tasks I have to do, and then I want to go home. And I think that's something we really need to listen to as management, is you have to adjust your management style or your structure to be able to accommodate that. They're asking for that kind of stuff and be covered. And you know, our recruitment posters don't say sign up so that you can learn how to type reports on a computer and document forms. You know, that's not on their posters. So I believe that's a huge change in the past 10 years and something that we really need to pay attention to.
Big challenge. Would you agree, Judy, Mike?
I have a little bit of a different take on it. I instilled a policy where we're checking all that stuff. It's just a check. And it's really about ownership of their gear and ownership of the equipment they use and assurance. I mean, they're doing rig checks anyhow, so now I've given them a set way to do it. I think there's a certain amount of onus that falls on them to be responsible for their own self-care and their gear and their equipment. And they've adjusted to it really, really well. And again, to your point, Chris, it's not arduous and harrowing. We're not doing, you know, we're not sitting there for a half hour. It's a simple thing. But I think to have them be responsible for their own health and safety and feel that they have the ability to have some control over that is really empowering.
Mm-hmm. Michael?
Yeah, and that's the exact word I was going to actually throw out there, is the empowerment to have them take care of themselves, but also know that they have the support from my office and from my management team's office to get them through this.
In my world, I don't have the ability to hire new people. In fact, it's discouraged because of small community. And you know, it was again, as the only paid firefighter in the community, you're always conditioned that, you know, you're lucky to be in the position because we can't afford and we shouldn't have one. And it's been a long struggle. Personally, it's been a long fight to create this position. I've spoken to a couple of you, you know, at different events and said, you know, that years ago, this is what I'm fighting against. I've now, through my colleagues, learned how to put policy in place where I have the ability to pay my firefighters beyond fires and training. And in the policy said that with fire prevention activities, doing other duties, they will get paid for it. So my officers, my training officer gets an extra bunch of hours every month. My fire prevention officer now trained to do fire inspections and fire investigations. Whenever she does that, then she has the ability, and I pay her, I compensate her, albeit a paid on call rate, but I now have some staff, and that's that ownership thing. That's what I'm trying to do. I agree with you, Chris, in terms of I don't want to overdo the volunteers, and that's what I've tried to do. That's supposed to be my job, although in 20 years my job has got a little bit more involved as it is. We're certainly going to talk to the world out there is going to ask questions, and I'm interested to see what the questions and the topics are. But we chatted beforehand, and I've always said, here's a topic I wanted to bring out. I've always said the best thing, and I think you've probably heard this, the best thing you can teach a young firefighter is how to become an old firefighter. You've heard that before?
Yeah.
What are we doing today? Now we've got more and more challenges to keep our people engaged and make them old firefighters. Are people staying longer in the volunteer service? I don't know. Chris?
That's a tough. Statistic wise, I think you would say no. The statistic wise, they're not sticking around as volunteers as long. We just recently celebrated 43 and 335 year people last month with a really crappy celebration because of COVID, but we'll do it proper in a little bit. But you talk to neighboring departments and that, and it just doesn't happen that much anymore because it's just changing times. I think as we talked earlier, you have to adapt your methods to reach the young ones. Like the YouTube videos, I don't watch YouTube videos, but my two sons are teenagers and one's an adult. They watch YouTube nonstop. They're on there. Like he had to fix his dirt bike, my son, and he watched a YouTube video and fixed his dirt bike. And I'm like, which is totally foreign to me, but that's, so a couple of young firefighters come and say, can we start making some YouTube videos on how to run the pump and how to set up the tanker operations? I'm like, absolutely. And they did a phenomenal job, but that's something that I would never have thought of even 5-10 years ago. And it's something that we have to adapt to be able to reach that younger ones to maybe make the old firefighters, because standing at the front of the room barking at them or saying on the pump you're not doing it right, this is the way you got to do it, they'd rather watch a video than get hands on right away. So it is a lot of adapting your means and your methods.
I'm wondering, Judy, if we're going to start handing out less of the 35-year awards.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think if we look at our communities on the whole, volunteers for anything are less. And I think people, and this younger generation is showing us how to have clearer boundaries. My generation didn't have those boundaries. We just continued to give with our community. And I started as a volunteer firefighter. I was on 8 other boards. And this younger generation is saying, no, my family's important to me. So I think when we think about keeping people around for the longer period of time, it's about mental and physical health as well as embracing their families. So we have an association that does a lot of unique stuff and includes the families in that. And so they feel like there's a home for all of them. Now, that's obviously not in the day-to-day operations, but overall, there's a place for everyone. And I think it's recognizing that, that member isn't coming just by themselves anymore. And it doesn't matter what their family thinks. It's understanding that they have those pressures and being able to work around that.
You can't be a burden on the members or the members' families that you rely upon. So I know that in 1983, when I was handed a pager and a key on the first night, that was it. Welcome. If it goes off tonight, show up. Where have we changed, Mike? Michael, have we changed in 10 years or even longer?
I think we've changed quite a bit. I think we're looking at, we're trying to measure all of those ways to make things move forward in a more formal fashion without over inundating people with, like Chris said, with all the forms and all the paperwork and all of the administrative side of everything, but being safe at the same time. And it's a difficult balance, especially when you're dealing with the volunteers, and rolling that out and making sure that they're all inclusive and they're all involved and having that competent training so that they know that they're going to be safe with what they learn. I'm lucky enough. I just was advised last week that we have a volunteer that's going to be celebrating 50 years. So it's fantastic. So we have a lot of long-term volunteers here.
I know, Chris, you alluded to the term at some point on dealing with strategies of the retaining members, I should say, and some of those strategies, again, I think in the last 10 years have changed is how you keep people. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Like one of the things I firmly believe in, and it was, you know, a kind of a project we did 10 years ago, and we did is turning the fire department more into a business, and that's totally foreign to what used to be. But you're seeing a lot more fire department management and that don't necessarily have firefighting experience, and they're there because you have to run it as a business. We're a brand, and we got to put our brand out. We did a project a long time ago about branding, and it was a university student that was working here for the summer, and she said, "Can I do a branding project based on the fire service?" I'm like, "Have at it. I have no idea what you're even talking about, but go for it. Sounds cool." And her professor was like, "This, I've never seen a volunteer fire department with a brand exercise." So we did the whole thing and sold our brand. And it was to do with public education. You see our brand, oh yeah, there's the fire department crest, I should check my smoke alarm. One of the things that spun off of that with the brand and increasing our brand awareness in the community was our volunteer applications went through the roof, because they're like, people were starting to see and go, "I like that group. That group seems like they know what they're doing. That seems like a fun group." And we had a lot more young people come in, and I had no idea why till I kind of figured it out. We kind of chat about it. And I'm like, that's pretty cool. I never ever saw that coming and never understood. But now through the years, I've obviously educated myself a little bit more and understand more that is something that we need to look at. Is we're as much a business as Pepsi and Gatorade and all of our sponsors here today. That we have to run it as a business.
Who would have thought that we'd actually be sitting here talking about our target audiences and our channels to communicate that information, right? 10 years ago, even.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think if yeah, as you mentioned, a soft drink company would kill for our reputation, and this brand that is so important and so respected. I mean, we're proud to wear it on our shoulders, Judy. I mean, and people want to be a part of it.
One of my very best friends in the fire service, tip of the hat to Deputy Chief Linda Mason. She actually didn't come from the floor and had a harder time in her fire service as such. Because she didn't, but what she brought with her was a degree and some business savvy, and she continues to provide that as the deputy chief in her role with the city of Airdrie. And I think it's really prevalent. I belong to a group called A Few Women, so Alberta Fire Emergency and Wildfire Women, and we're seeing more of us come into the fire service through that method, because it is a business. We have to look at realistically what we're doing. So very few of us have come from the floor, and I think it's critical, like your point, Chris, to understand we need to respect our brand. We need to understand that's a big part of recruitment and retention, and it's also what's going to make our young people take a look at us.
And it adds a new credit, if you will, from retention to the fact that we are involved in business continuity.
Yes, in a huge way.
Huge way.
Absolutely, Tom. And just to touch on your point, you said like companies, and this is what sold it to me, is companies would kill to have our reputation and our brand awareness. And that's what sold it for me, is like a business person. I talked about this, what we were doing. They're like, if my business could have the respect and whatever that you guys automatically get, he said, you could do nothing and you still have more respect than any of, logos for anything else. And he said, for you to play off that is extremely smart. And I'm like, well, okay, if someone in the business world's saying that's good, then it must be good.
So what's the next step? In terms of, we are in this pandemic still, and it does vary, as we talked about earlier, across the country. Are we going to come out of this in terms of forget it's all gone, or are we going to make permanent changes as a result?
I think we're going to have some serious changes that are going to be coming out of this, and I think there's going to be there's things that are going to happen. I still believe that we haven't seen yet, and things that are going to come up. And it's important with our roles to be like, I think it was Chris that said earlier, that we have to be ahead of the curve so that we can be prepared to institute different things that need to be done so that our personnel and our communities are safe.
I think the landscape has forever changed. I mean, Chris, what's gonna come out of this in terms of your department, or Is it just going to be a flick of the switch and it's back to normal? I don't think so.
No, I agree, Tom. Not even close. There's going to be a lot of these protocols that stick around, and they'll be modified. As Judy said, you write protocols, you get it out to everybody, and they're going to be continually modified to fit that. But like we're going to be decontaminating even more. Like we were worried about decontaminating after fires to cut our cancer claims in that town. Now we're going to be decontaminating after every medical call, and I think that's going to stick around. So it's going to be good. It's just going to be staying with the changes and keeping the stuff there. And we're going to, have to make sure that we do have proper supplies in that. Whereas before, a lot of fire departments were maybe not keeping up on medical supplies because we really didn't use that many. And how that works and partnerships that we can form to make sure areas have enough equipment to deal with it. So,
Judy, would you concur?
Well, I absolutely agree with what Chris is saying. And, I think that this is maybe a bit of a wake up for us and an opportunity for us to look at how we're doing things and why we're doing them. I think tradition is really, really important, but I think some of the things, you were talking about breaking your guys into platoons. We run that way, but I'm thinking about changing things a little bit so that we're more prepared and not as able to contaminate each other as we go through COVID again.
I think it's going back to the brand idea. We do have a very unique and popular brand, but it's a fragile brand. And I think we're always on the edge. The volunteers could say, I'm done with this tomorrow. And your whole workforce goes away. Your whole response force goes away because one person is sick and the other people get that way. Or a mistake is made and your brand has been tarnished. I mean, it is so easy, and it puts more pressure on all of us, I think, to make sure we protect our brand. Is that the way we should be going in terms of raising our game in that regard, Chris?
I agree. What I was thinking the whole time we were saying that, Tom, was something that everyone had talked about earlier about the parades and doing the birthday salutes, and that was such a fragile thing. And I know Judy said, we were debating whether we should do it or shouldn't do it. And, we actually got some backlash from the community saying, excuse me, how can we be putting those people at risk and putting all that type of stuff just to make loud noises and all that stuff in the community. So it is playing that. You really have to think things through now before you make that decision. Something simple like a birthday parade or saluting the hospital could backfire on you and really tarnish your brand. So we don't have the leeway either way anymore. We have to really think about things and what is best for the community. Because you said, Tom, we're the focus in a lot of the community and people watch what we do. So we got to make sure we're staying on top of that.
Always remember optics, because that's big. And you tell people, inside the hall, what they see outside when we open the doors is make sure that the eyes of the world are on you, and you need to not only act accordingly, but remember that they are watching you. And yeah, it's amazing. We've hit I think pretty much our time today in terms of our discussion. I know we're going to open up. Laura's going to come back in here and see if there are any questions to the World Wide Web. And Field will take them. Sure. Hi, Laura.
Hi, I'm back. We
Back.
do have some questions. Thank you, guys. That is wonderful. All right, first question. As all of you have touched on the need for crews POC to clear the hall as quick as possible after the incident is controlled, have you implemented any kind of limited paging to staff, only a single engine response, so that 15 people don't respond to the hall and only 4 respond? Are your paging systems limited to all or none, or do you have options to respond platoons within a hall for single unit responses?
I'll start with that one, and we were lucky in terms of the fact that our 3 fire hall setup being so close, and it does, again, optically, it look bad when you have a residential smoke alarm call and 3 engines show up with and people go, well, why did you send all those trucks? Well, that's too much too soon is better than too little too late model. But when this all came down, we were positioned, and we made a conscious effort that we take minimal staff and multiple maximum vehicles and respond to everything with less people in them. And that was our approach. So to the rest of you, you can add in on that, chime in on that maybe. Chris?
Yeah, I agree. And I know some departments, neighboring departments did that. They went to a platooning system where during the day and night, only for medical calls, it was a medical response team. Unfortunately for us, some days we only get 3 or 4 out in the daytime. So we don't know how many we're getting. So it was very tough for us to implement that. But definitely something we have talked about and maybe look for in the future if COVID spikes again, to go that route, because we learned, to what Judy said, you got so many people sitting at home when they're can't go to work and that we could possibly go to that. So
Judy?
We use I Am Responding, so as soon as the tones go off, they check in on that program. And initially we had everybody, the full-time crew manage it, so it's a crew of 4 that initially heads out. And if more people are needed, we had them all respond through the bays and not through the office portion of the building. And what they would do at the beginning was wait in their vehicles. So they'd respond to the hall, they'd check in that they were here, and then they'd hear if we needed additional help. So, and then when we were in trucks together, we were masking up. We still are within 6 feet of each other. We mask up. So we may run with a full truck. They'll be on masks before they get there, or BA if they need.
Mm-hmm.
And in Cape Breton, given the size of the organization and the number of different departments that exist, the station chiefs, depending on their crew availability and depending on their call volume, they would evaluate that and make those amendments as needed. Sometimes they'd reach out directly to me and we'd set some plans up and go from there.
Okay, we have another question here. Are you all referring to paid on call or true volunteer firefighters? Can you speak to changing times and maybe consider referring to a different name for POC?
Interesting.
Ours in Cape Breton are all true volunteer.
yeah, we have the paid on call. So
Our volunteers are paid and our paid on call are paid, but we call ourselves volunteers.
We are called volunteers, of course, but again, it's a paid on call department. So.
And I do think that's maybe a debate for another episode, because that is going to come. If for certain legislations, tax purposes, and they're volunteers. For certain other things, they're paid on call. So it's definitely a debate and something we could look at. But at the end of the day, that they volunteer their time, that they don't have to respond when the pager goes off. So that's the way I look at it.
That's the biggest thing. It's like if I'm a volunteer, then I can choose not to attend if I'm asked to go. But if I do go, I will be compensated for my time, and that is where that's the different, if you will, that separates the volunteers in terms of that term. So.
All right, we've got a couple shout outs of well dones as well from Kendra Shaw and Vince McKenzie. It's great points and well done. I've got a question.
Almost time for bed in Newfoundland, isn't it?
Vince is definitely onto his afternoon nap by now.
Well, I agree. You guys have done a great job. I have a question. I'm going to throw in there as we have a few more minutes. What is the one top of mind problem that is kind of keeping you up at night as a challenge that you need to solve in your department?
That's a pretty easy one for me. Mine is twofold. Mine is being the new guy here and not knowing who the players are in the community, not necessarily in the fire service, but just learning who everybody is and what everything is and where everything is. I'm getting to the point now where I don't need a GPS everywhere I go anymore. So that's a good step. The second part is the structure of the organization, the departments, and the reporting and how the responsibility flows within the municipality. So that's one of the struggles that we have is trying to figure out how to massage that in the future and make things a little bit better.
I would, something. It's been a tough time, and we're activated right now in 2 separate emergency operations centers. One ongoing since March, obviously for the pandemic, and we have an activated EOC for flooding right now. So I'm tired of writing sit reports. I'm, every day, it's just to a point where this is starting to weigh. What keeps me awake is the what's next. It just seems to keep coming. And fortunately, we're in a position that 10 years ago, we used that term, that's kind of benchmark, that 10 years ago, the department was the old fire department that I joined, and 10 years before that, it was a department in transition. Today, we are night and day from where we were, and knowing that I could turn my pager off and tones could go and they got it. When you show up at a scene, there's nothing more gratifying than walking up to a fire scene and having a volunteer say, "What are you doing here? We got this." That's taken me almost 21 years to get to that point, and we're certainly there. So it's kind of opposite to what you asked, but I mean, at the end of the day, I'm thinking ahead in terms of, have we seen it all? And again, what's next?
It's a good question. Judy, what's on your
I
mind?
don't know. I think I'm a little bit of both from Tom and Mike and probably Chris. I'm new here. I'm not new to the chief role. I've been one forever. So people are for a million years now, learning who the people are. And for me, I worry about maintaining retention with our people. They've been gone for a long time. And there's only so much phone calls and newsletters and etc. I really want to assure that we're going to have them come in and be safe at the same time. So that's one of the things I worry about.
I'm worried myself that we've got the crews that we have in place, and I wish we could keep them forever. And I know that's in the volunteer world, that's not possible, never is. And that's what, it's that you're happy to have and lucky to have who you have and who's on the team. And yeah, they're not here forever, and that's the biggest problem.
One of the things I think is important is to lead through change. And that's going to be the challenge in this year. I mean, we've seen that already, and to continue to lead and, to know that we're going to modify our departments. They're going to look different. We've already all said that, as we go forward. And so I think it's being able to think outside of the box and, like Chris said so aptly, stay ahead of the game.
I think just the sum it up too is managing the volunteers' time. That's the thing that really concerns me. We put a lot on hold for COVID, and we have a lot to get caught up on, and we can only ask so much of their time. Whether it's training how many times a month, and they come in and do their truck checks. We have critical incident stress training. We have decontamination training. We have decontaminating the truck training. Like, just so much stuff that keeps getting added on. It's managing their time that we can't ask them to give any more time. So it's now fitting more stuff into that same amount of time and not burn them out, because that's where we're not going to retain them. Is they will say, "I really appreciate it, but I don't have enough time. I got to spend more time with my family." Once COVID's over, like a lot of them are saying, "I need to get away from my family right now," but they will go back. I need to spend more time with my family. So it's managing that volunteer's time that really concerns me, and how we're going to fit this into that time frame.
All right, well, great answers. We will wrap this panel up. Thank you, Tom, Chris, Judy, and Michael, for your wonderful insights. You guys did a great job. We've made a donation to the Canadian Fallen Firefighters Foundation on your behalf in appreciation of your time today. Volunteered your time. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Awesome.